Today I've got a Shakespeare for you. Don't run the other direction when I say Shakespeare, please. Because a lot of people that I know, well-educated people, are still scared about Shakespeare. You do not need to be scared, okay? It's going to be okay. And it is going to be worth your effort, I promise. I'm going to start with I'm going to talk about The Merchant of Venice today. And I recommend that this be one of the first, if not the first Shakespeare play that you read. It is a little bit simpler in plot and easier to get through than some of the other Shakespeares. And it's rich with all of the, and I'll touch on this in a minute, but just all kinds of incredible themes that you can discuss and ponder. It's always got the quotable Shakespeare, you know, the stuff that's fabulous to memorize, that you can you can quote to others and think about yourself. So, The Merchant of Venice is the story of some young men in Venice. And they're friends, and it starts out with them talking, and one of them is in love with a girl who's really wealthy. And he's kind of upper class, but he doesn't have a lot of money. And he has a friend named Antonio is the one, I think, that Antonio's the one that has money. Now, he's been really good with his money up to this point. He's a business owner, businessman. He barters and trades, and he's sent out some stuff. He's got 3 ships that are supposed to be coming in, and this is the play where we get that famous phrase, "My ships are coming in," because Antonio's ships were literally coming in. His ships were coming in, and they were going to make him a wealthy man. And so we always say, well, my ships are going to come in because we're going to be like Antonio, and when all of our stuff returns, then we'll be really wealthy like he was. But he had made those investments, so don't misunderstand the phrase. We use it today like we're going to get wealthy overnight, but that's not really what it meant. So he was out of money. He's out of money at this point because he's invested it all. And his friend wants to marry this other girl that he's in love with, Portia. But he's out of money, and he's got to show up there and look really well off and rich in order to have any kind of a chance with her. They've met one other time. He thinks that she likes him. He's not sure, but he wants to go try. He wants to be a suitor. So he meets with Antonio, and he and Antonio talk. And Antonio's like, you know what? You're my friend. You're my best friend, and I will loan you anything. We'll take care of it. I'll find you money. I mean, all these creditors trust me. Anybody will loan money to me. And he's like, well, man, I can't borrow from you. What's his Bassanio? So Antonio's the merchant of Venice. Bassanio's his friend that's in love with Portia. So he says, man, I don't want to borrow from you. And Antonio's like, well, that's the only way. We'll go borrow some money from somebody to get you all set up. Bassanio's actually borrowed money from him in the past, hasn't paid him back. Bassanio's like, this is going to be it. If I can get this girl to marry me, then I'm going to be loaded, and I can pay back everything I've ever borrowed from you. And Antonio's like, oh, don't worry about it. You know, he's like nice like that or whatever. So then the scene splits to Portia, and Portia has a maid, Nerissa, and Portia and Nerissa are having this conversation. I'm going to quote just a couple lines from a few different places in this play, so you can get a feeling for the language, and you can know how awesome it is, and because I want you to see how Shakespeare, every play touches on so many different themes and ideas, highlights so many different principles. There's just this richness that you can come back to over and over and over again. So Nerissa and Portia are talking, and Nerissa gives her some advice, and Portia's like, those are good sentences and well pronounced. And Nerissa says, they would be better if well followed. So you should take my advice. You should follow what I just told you to do because it's good advice. And Portia says, if to do were as easy as to know what were good to do, chapels had been churches and poor men's cottages princes' palaces. If we always followed our consciences and lived all the principles we were familiar with, if we always followed our own good advice, then poor men's cottages would be princes' palaces. We would have much more success in life because we followed our own good advice. So they go along, and what you get introduced to is this funny little, and Shakespeare does this a lot. It's this situation where Portia's dad has died, and in his will, he left some criteria for how she was supposed to find her husband. There's 3 chests of lead and silver and gold, and one of them has her picture in it, and she's supposed to the suitors come. And they say, okay, they can spend as much time with her as they want. But when the time comes that they want to marry her, then there's a little, I don't know if you'd say like rhyme or a little poem on each chest. And they read the poem, and then they choose one. And if her picture is in the chest, then they get to marry her. And if it's not, they have to like sign a document or make a promise that they will never marry anyone else. So her dad's tried to make this situation where if they want to marry her, they got to be super serious about it. So she's stuck. And I guess technically she wouldn't have to live according to her father's will, but there's nobody she really wants to marry. And she feels kind of duty bound to honor this. And it was a different time and a different age, and so she really kind of had to do what her father said. And he may have made her will conditional upon it. It doesn't really say. So she's got to follow this will. She's unhappy about it. All these suitors have come. She's not interested in them. And the moment is coming when, and so you get to see two different suitors. You meet them. They're quirky in their own funny way. And this is why it's fun to watch, because different directors will interpret it a little bit different way. The one that I saw, one of the versions, I've seen Merchant of Venice a few times, but one of the versions I saw of Merchant of Venice had one of the suitors, I can't remember which one, he had a braid in his beard with a bow tie on it. It was hilarious. And this is a really funny one. There's a lot of funny lines in it, and you can really interpret it in a very fun, humorous way. And so these men come, and you watch as they choose the wrong chest, and they don't get Portia, and she's super relieved, and you're relieved with her because you don't want that to happen. In the meantime, Antonio is over here borrowing money so that Bassanio can go try to woo Portia. And so then you get some financial principles in there. You get some human nature principles, because they're going to borrow the money from a Jew, and you have to understand the times and the attitudes toward Jews. There was a ton of animosity between Christians and Jews. Jews were the minority. Jews were oppressed, and there was a lot of prejudice against Jews. And prejudice is a really interesting theme to look for in The Merchant of Venice, because there's prejudice on both sides, and there's some justice and mercy. That's one of the main themes in this play. It's really valuable to look at, and there's a very beautiful speech that Portia gives about mercy, and I'll talk about in a minute. But anyway, so they're having this conversation, and Shylock is the Jew, and Shylock, there's this whole little monologue where he says how much he hates Antonio. Antonio spits on him in the street. He treats him like garbage, and they know that they hate each other. So he goes to Shylock and he's like, hey, I want to borrow some money from you. And Shylock's like, well, okay, you know, and first he lets the audience know how much he hates Antonio. And he says, okay, but he wants to borrow 3,000 ducats for 3 months. And Shylock's considering this, like, oh, I don't know. And then he realizes, wait a minute, I can loan him the money and I'll get my revenge. And so he makes up this scenario, and this is where the term a pound of flesh comes from, that if he doesn't return the full amount of money within the 3 months, then Shylock can remove a pound of flesh from his body in whatever spot he chooses. So Antonio interprets it as, well, hey, he's being generous. He's turned nice. I don't know. He's turned over a new leaf. He's a nice guy now. Bassanio is there like, there is no way you're going to sign to this bond. There's no way you're going to do this. We know who he is. He hates us with a passion, and we hate him. And why are we kind of making a deal with the devil, so to speak? Why are we going to sign a contract, and we're going to, you know, basically sign your life away? And Antonio's like, you know, he doesn't mean it. Antonio is ignoring human nature, and he's ignoring the fact that people are consistent in their behavior. If he had had a true change of heart, he would have sought for Antonio's forgiveness, and he would have been truly repentant, and you would have seen some serious behavior changes. But they weren't there. And Antonio is fooling himself in this bargain that he makes. He says, there's a really good discussion you can have here. Shylock's talking. You have rated me about my monies and my usances. Still, I have borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is a badge of all of our tribe. And so, usance means usury. Go to the Old Testament and look up what the usury laws were, especially in Exodus, because the Jews were forbidden to charge interest of their own tribe. They could charge interest, of other Jews, he calls them tribe. They could charge interest only of other peoples. And the Christians said, you know, they took it to a higher law and said you shouldn't ever charge interest of anyone. And so that was one of the main things that Antonio would always berate Shylock about, was that he always charged people interest on the money that he lent, and that was unchristian. So he's like, you always, you know, and so should you charge interest, should you not charge interest? Is interest a boon to an economy? Is it a capitalist principle? Talk about it. So he goes on, they make this bond, he calls it a merry bond. Shylock tries to kind of, you know, smile and talk lightly and make light of what he's talking about to try to kind of deceive Antonio, make him think it's a good idea. They go along, the plot thickens, Bassanio goes, he sees Portia, they're all in love with each other, then you get to read through what happens there. One of the things, I'm just going to say this, people are so scared of Shakespeare. Shakespeare's, they're plays, okay? They're short. If you read them, it takes you, even with your Asimov, which there's a post on that, you need to watch that, even when you're listening to it, even when, you know, and then you go watch it. I mean, we're talking about an hour and a half to 2 hours to read or watch it, maybe 3 hours to read it if you're really like looking at all the references. Merchant of Venice is a good one. It doesn't have quite as many ancient sources cited. It's a little more straightforward, but there's still a good amount of depth there. So then, the 3 months is up. The ships haven't come in. Antonio's in a bad way. Bassanio wants to come and save his friend because now he's got to go to court and the bond is going to be exercised and it's going to mean Antonio's life, and Bassanio's just going crazy, freaking out. And another thing that's fabulous about Shakespeare is he is a Democrat. Now, that means he's democratic. That means that he's a Democrat in the traditional liberal sense of the word, which means that he sees all men as equal. And many of his plays show the women as the heroine. The woman is smarter than the man, or just as smart. She has ideas, she solves problems, she creates solutions in a way that was not the norm in Elizabethan society. And so we love him for that, you know, it really, and he really moved forward. It made a huge impact. I mean, if you had 2 books in your house in early America, you had the Bible and you had Shakespeare, and Shakespeare promoted very aggressively this democratic idea of the equality of the sexes. So that's really marvelous. So a woman saves the day in Merchant of Venice, and she's brilliant, Portia, and she comes into the court and she pleads for Antonio's life, and I want to read a few lines of her speech because it's absolutely beautiful. She's talking about the Shylock is like, justice, 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 we've got to have justice, and Portia's like, what about mercy? Mercy is a higher principle than justice, and we know that it's a principle, it's an attribute of God, which is what she says in this speech, and you should consider, you know, there are times, Shylock, when you needed mercy, and right now somebody else needs mercy from you, and if you expect to attain mercy, you should give mercy. So she says, the quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven. And that's what it feels like. When you're facing a hard and fast law and consequences and justice, it feels like a stone. It feels like irreversible. Nothing can be done. That is the law and it cannot be changed. And mercy tempers it. Mercy makes it possible to go around the law in some way. So it feels like this dew from heaven, this beautiful God-sent idea. A drop sends a gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Twas mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. A king is a king when he really exercises mercy and knows when to. We love him more when he exercises justice and mercy. And then later on, but mercy is above this sceptered sway. Mercy is above even kings. It is enthroned in the heart of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. And earthly power doth then show likest God's when mercy seasons justice. Absolutely beautiful. And this idea of in a family environment, in a business environment, when should the rules and regulations and the policies and the laws and the job chart reign? When is justice gonna be honored, and when can there be mercy? Why can there be mercy? How can there be mercy? And there has to be a good balance, or you just have monsters on your hands, whether it's workers who won't do their work because there's no justice, because there's always mercy, or who absolutely hate your guts because there's never any mercy. And leaders need to understand these principles. And if you're a parent or a teacher or a manager or a business owner, you are a leader, and you have to understand the difference between justice and mercy and when to exercise both of them in very wise ways. And this will give you a beginning for a discussion of that. One other thing I want to mention, there's all different topics and subjects. You'll find science, you'll find history, you'll find the Greek gods, you'll find the great books cited, all of that richness in Shakespeare. And another thing here at the end of The Merchant of Venice, they're talking, and it says, but let's see, the man that hath no music in himself, nor is not moved with concord of sweet sounds, is fit for treasons, stratagems, and spoils. The motions of his spirit are dull as night, and his affections dark as Erebus. Let no such man be trusted. Mark the music. So, music, another topic that you could discuss in Shakespeare. And why should a man not be trusted if he can't be moved by great music? What does that say about him, his soul, his hardness? What does it say about justice and mercy? I don't know. There's all kinds of incredibly marvelous stuff in The Merchant of Venice. It's short. Get your Asimov out and go through it. Listen to it. Get your Sparks notes, your Shakespeare for Dummies, whatever you got to get out. Resources that we've got here and more that we'll post in the future for you. But just tackle it. Just do it. Just read The Merchant of Venice and go watch it in play form or in movie form and enjoy it. There is so much richness there that you can, if you will put in the effort, you can fall in love with Shakespeare. If this has been helpful for you, if you've enjoyed this review of Merchant of Venice, then please share it with a friend, like us on Facebook, join our email list, and become involved in our programs. Comment here, share your thoughts and ideas. What experiences have you had with Shakespeare? Have you liked it? Have you struggled with it? How can we better help you in your pursuit to understand Shakespeare? Share any resources that you have with those that come here, and in the comment box. Send us your questions in for Q&A Tuesday so we can answer those, and we will see you next time.